What's up, nerds and nerdettes and wee little nerdlings all? It's your buddy Big Johnny G for Two Gun Pixie presents Legendary Gaming. Welcome back, everyone. Thank you very much for joining me on this Midday Monologue Monday. And I have been thinking ever since I dropped the other one about my classic role-playing games. I've been thinking about classic board games as well. You ever think about classic board games? I do quite often. Before we get into that, I just want to say thank you to everyone that's been subscribing to Two Gun Pixie, as well as everyone that's been checking us out on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Very cool that you go check us out over there, as well as looking at our Two Gun Pixie Zazzle store to see some of our merchandise, our print-on-demand, nerdy and RPG-inspired goodness. Hopefully you'll find something there that you like. Anyway, this Midday Monologue Monday, I wanted to talk to you about classic board games. What are your favorites? I know I have mine, but which are yours? Which games from your youth really struck home? You know what I mean? Which games really hit you to the point where you realized you love board games? What has been your favorite classic board game to play? I want to know. You must have one, maybe more than one. So why don't you put it down in the comments and we can start talking about it. I have a few I'd like to mention, a few I'd like to talk about. And no, I've talked enough about Dark Tower. I have enough videos on that, and you can go check those out. But we're gonna be talking about other games from my youth. Now, I'm 50 years old, so my youth was a long time ago for some of my viewers.
Hey!
And about equal for others, I think. So, I have a few that are still in my collection. There's a couple that escaped the fire, and a couple of others that I've reacquired over the years because I wanted them back so bad. Like, what games would qualify for that for you? If you had a fire, which of your most classic, oldest games would be on your list to go buy back? I think that's a good way of thinking about this. All right, we're gonna get down at the table, the bench, down in the park, wherever I got room. And we're gonna talk about some classic tabletop board games. Dungeon by TSR from 1975. 1 to 4 player game. The modern version I think handles up to 8. And it's good for about ages 8 and up, and it'll take you about 30-45 minutes. This game, I got in about 1980, and I loved playing this because I had gotten Dungeons & Dragons first. And then I got this game. So to me, it was a Dungeons & Dragons board game, which it really technically wasn't. It was a fantasy-based game. It was published by TSR. So you could call it Dungeons & Dragons and probably not really be wrong. But, you know, I also believe arguably it's never really was a D&D game to begin with. Though the original game that I liked so much had really interesting characters. You know, you have what you would expect, right? You have the elf, you have the wizard. But instead of a fighter, they called it a hero. And then you had this other character called the superhero. No cape, no mask, just a more powerful fighter, basically. It was a fighter and a higher level fighter, I guess. But the game was a lot of fun. You had a series of monster cards and treasure cards, and they were all divided by the different levels of the dungeon. And on the board, the different levels of the dungeon were represented by different colors. So whichever color you were in, you drew that appropriate card for a monster, and then for a treasure if you beat the monster and you got a treasure. Combat was really easy. It was a point-based system. You need this to hit that, and if you don't have that, you know, you make a roll, but you also find things to give you bonuses, like magic swords. It really was a stripped-down version of D&D, but that also made it a very easy intro game to Dungeons & Dragons, if, unlike me, you had not played the RPG first. It was a really fun game, and I think it still is. There's been multiple updates to the game. I have the original 1974 copy, and I also have one of the updates. I think it's a 2014 copy. I think is the update I have. And I still think this is a great game to introduce younger children to the concept of Dungeons and Dragons. And I'm really glad that I was able to get it back from my collection. Star Wars: Escape from the Death Star by West End Games. This came out in 1990. It was a 1 to 4 player game, good for ages 12 and up, and it took you about an hour, maybe a little bit more to run, maybe a little less depending on the luck of the drawers that you get in the game. Might have sped things up. Now, that was a 1 to 4 player game. This was also actually a great solo game. You know, it was one of the early games that I encountered that was both a multiple player game and a solo game. Not the first one, but one of the early ones. And I always enjoyed that aspect of the game. Now, in this, you could be Luke Skywalker, you could be Princess Leia Organa, you could be Han Solo, or you could be Chewbacca. And it takes place during the scene of the original movie where they're literally trying to escape from the Death Star. So while you're working your way through this tactical maze of the Death Star trying to escape, you're going to be drawing cards in order to get to your goal of shutting down the tractor beam and escaping in the Millennium Falcon. Now, the cards that you're drawing were a really great AI system for the game because it threw multiple hazards up at you at different times, and it wasn't always the same thing in the same place, which added to the fun of the replayability of the game. I mean, maybe there was a hazard that you came across, maybe it was stormtroopers, or even Lord Vader himself. But the game also gave as well as take away, so to speak, because there were cards floating around in that deck that represented help from R2-D2, C-3PO, and Obi-Wan Kenobi. The game was always fun, playing through it, getting to the end, and for me, it was one of the earlier games that I've played. It might have been the first game that I played that had that concept of the multiple card drawers to change up the game every time you play. The more I think about it, the more I think that that may very well have been the first time I played one of those games. So for me to have gotten that back in my collection after all these years was amazing. It was absolutely amazing, and I'm so glad that it's sitting on the shelf and gets to hit the table from time to time. Knights of Camelot. TSR 1980. A 2 to 6 player game, good for ages 12 and up, and took you about an hour or so to play. This was another game that had the feel of this super replayability due to the drawing of the cards in order to generate your quests and adventures in the game. And in this, you're playing a young knight who's journeying through the Arthurian realms. You're in search of brigands and monsters to defeat, as well as knights to beat in jousts. All the time you're going to be building this sort of renown for yourself. You're going to be building a name because your ultimate goal is to not just become a knight, but to become a knight of the Round Table itself. Now, besides the cards, the game also had an amazing set of random table generators, and that these were used to create an almost unlimited variety of encounters. So along with the cards, I don't know if any one player would have enough time to literally play through every single type of encounter, adventure, and quest the same way, in the same order, ever again. I honestly don't understand the math that would reach to a point that would make that possible. And if so, make it possible more than just a freak encounter time. Now, this is also a board game, one of the first board games that I ever encountered that would be considered like a sandbox game. Everywhere within Arthur's Realm, you could go anywhere. You could go and find quests. You could pledge yourself to ladies. You could pledge yourself to lords. It was all up to you. Everything was up to you. And that might be the first time I encountered a board game that had that openness that an RPG has. And that was something that always appealed to me. Now, something that I actually want to do now, I never did back in the day, I don't think I knew about it back then, was that Dragon Magazine, all the way back to issue number 58. They had rules in the magazine concerning this game, Knights of Camelot. And the rules are specifically how to play a knave. a bad knight. You didn't have to be a good guy. I'm only assuming that you were instead trying to get in the good graces of Modred. But since I've not read the article, that is nothing but a guess at this point. But it is cool that in the old days, the early days, TSR gave you an option to play the other side, opening the game up even more. Now, those are 3 games from my youth that I do still have back in my collection. Well, these are great games, and I am so happy that I have them back in my collection, or I'm on the track of getting some of them back in my collection. But what would you want back in your collection from your childhood? Why don't you let us know? Well, thanks for joining us, everyone. I'm your buddy Big Johnny G for Two Gun Pixie Presents Legendary Gaming. And my friends, I am out of here.